Okay, thank you. So we'll begin with our session now. I understand we have few learners with us. Can you confirm if you are getting my voice clearly? Okay, thank you. So we will now go ahead with our today's discussion. Very warm welcome, dear learners, to this second session. In fact, we couldn't have class yesterday due to my personal reasons. So we will begin by taking a small recapitulatory uh, back travel, and then we will go ahead with our today's discussion. As you know, day 4 yesterday or in the session 1, we discussed journal structure of the DCE program, which is a Diploma in Creative Writing in English. Meenakshi, do you want to say something? You have raised your hand, so would you like to say something?
No, sir, I just confirmed that I am there.
Oh, welcome. Thank you, thank you. So during our first session, we discussed the basic objective of the program. We all know that creating writing is an art and a special area of interest. A lot of people have this particular knack, and we all love to read literature, the creative literature. So there is methodology, there is a pedagogy as to how to develop the art of creative writing, and then how to sharpen it and how to mature in this. So that we discussed day 4 yesterday, and then we also discussed the overall structure of the program. So during our discussion, we had discussed that the program, which is DCE, Diploma in Creative Writing in English, and this particular program has 6 courses in all on offering. Out of these 6 courses, 2 courses are compulsory, which is course number 1 and course number 6, that is DCE 01 and DCE 06. These are general principles of writing and the project report. Besides, from 2, 3, 4, 5, out of these 4 courses, the learners have to choose any 3. So those are dealing with the like feature writing, then story writing, then writing for media, that is for radio and television, and writing poetry. So out of these 4, the learner has to choose 3 to make total courses 5. So the very first issue that we discussed day 4 yesterday was the nomenclature of the program, and also the nomenclature of the courses, and then how does the courses are arranged, how what is the role of blocks, or how do we explain or understand blocks, and then how do we understand the units. So let me just reconfirm it. We have program DCE, we have certain number of courses. In general parlance, we say number of papers. So here we will call them courses, and then each course will have certain number of blocks. So block means a small group which is consisting 4 units. So this particular program, which is DCE, has 5 courses which one has to study. Each course will be having 4 blocks, and each block will be having 4 units. So roughly we will be studying 16 units in one course. So that is the basic understanding of the structure of the program. We discussed the general principles of writing, which is course 1. And in this particular course, there are 4 blocks. The very first block was the fundamental norms of writing, and we focused on this particular block. But I would like to introduce the remaining 3 blocks also. The remaining 3 blocks, the second block is the structure of language, uh, the structure of material. That means the contents that we write. How do we structure it, and then the details we'll be discussing when we come to this. Then block number 3 is the dramatization of idea. How do we develop the idea? How do we, bring in different characters into it and then make uh, either poetry, a poem, or story, or play. Then the block 4 is basically to discuss the uh, the details or the preparatory aspects of manuscript. How do we prepare final copy for publishing? That would include like typing, like presentation, making copy error free. So that means it has to be proof checked. Then certain other issues are there, which are like how do we mark the errors, how the errors are rectified, and then what uh, shape the copy takes when it arrives at the publishers or at the publishing table. So, as I mentioned, we have 4 blocks. The very first block is the general principles uh, of writing. First block is the principal norms of writing. Then we have the structure of the material. Then we have the dramatization of idea. And the last block is the preparation of copy for publishing. So, or rather, we can say preparing publication. So I'll come back to the block 1, which is general principles of writing. That is the course title. Within this, we discuss the fundamental norms of writing. So this was our block title, and this block has 4 units. So we discussed unit number 1, which was writing. What is writing? Why there is writing? Uh, what is the history of writing? What is the purpose of writing? What is the function of writing? And all these issues we discussed. Then we discussed how writing is associated with the humankind, how did it develop, and what are the factors that shape our writing. So, types of writing, and how do contents go into writing, what form they take, what is the role of the style, what is the role of the different words. And then we, very important issue that we discussed, how do we develop writing? So I think if you remember, we discussed that to become a writer, or to, to those who are aspiring to be writers or authors or contributors, they must be avid readers. They have to do a lot of reading. Another point that we discussed is that the best one can start to become a writer is by writing a diary. So, diary writing is very fundamental beginning, but very effective, because if you keep on writing diary every day, you can revisit what you wrote yesterday, day before yesterday, 10 days back, 15 days back, 20 days back. And as you continue writing a diary, and as you go through it almost every day, or some parts of it you will visit every day, then you will learn that, yeah, I missed this, I must have added this, I should have done this, I shouldn't have had this. So all these, self-evaluatory factors are very, very important. So they contribute to your perfection. So diary writing is one which is one of the best beginning to become a writer. So then we also discussed 2 very important points in the unit 2, which was the directness and lucidity. How to achieve directness and lucidity. So we discussed the directness, we discussed what is lucidity. During the course of discussion, we also discussed like clarity versus transparency. So one point that I wanted to clear or add to what our discussion, whatever we discussed the other day, that apart from other factors, because we said the transparency means honesty and clarity means to have a very clear idea what an author, what a person is going to make clear. So that means to have a clear idea what one is making clear. So that means the beginner or the aspiring author uh, must have very very clear, very crisp, very transparent idea before him or her as to what he or she is going to talk about. Making clear means to talk about, to unravel the facts, to reveal the facts. So the fact here I mean to say the details of the content or details of the topic about which you are thinking or he or she is thinking to write about. So one small addition to it is that what is directness? We also discussed about the directness. So directness is not something that you hit upon something or you confront something. Directness is something which is going to make straight impact on the reader. So the author must write in a style that his or her contents should, should directly reach, or they should be such that the reader or the target reader should be able to gather your message quite easily. So we all know that in if you we take a small example in the animal world, we have a lot of details. If you are if you are talking about the big animals, then there are buffalo, there are cows, there are bulls, and so many. So you must very clearly spell out the category of the animals, because categories of animals have any number of different animals. So you cannot just go on until and unless you are dramatizing the factors, you can keep on shifting the one category with the other, then the next one, the next one, and the next one. So but that happens when you are dramatizing the idea. That's a separate discussion, we will undertake that. So that is one point, because you are going to build an image in the reader's mind. So this image should not be either hit or shifted too often. You should go on talking, describing, detailing a particular image that has been built by the writer or the author in the mind or in the imagination of the reader. A small addition to this discussion is that language plays a very important role. Language is very, very important. I just now mentioned that diary writing can be one very good beginning to the aspiring writers, because they can revisit it quite often. They can check, they can find for themselves by themselves alone how does their writing reads, how what it conveys, or whether what they wanted to convey is clear, because the point we discussed earlier is the clarity. So whether they are able to make the point, because if you remember, it happens with most of us. In a fit of rage, we say something. Later on, we realize, no, I shouldn't have said this. Or sometimes we realize I shouldn't have this like this. Perhaps I was wrong to state things like this in a particular manner. Then we realize I could have or I should have explained or stated these things in a different manner. What it conveys? It conveys that in certain state of mind, we are not able to clearly spell out what we want to say. So it is always better you write in that situation, in that moment also, but don't make it final. Do not consider it final. So you visit, revisit, make third visit, fourth visit. So diary is one such instrument or device which can be very helpful, because you can, if say for example you wrote something day before yesterday, today you wrote something else, tomorrow you will also write something else. So when you write, when you know go through the pages, naturally you also glance and read something, and on many occasions you realize, no, I shouldn't have written this, or I should have written this like this, I could have written it better. So if all these ideas come to your mind, that means you are progressing, you are gathering more and more more and more ideas, and you can not only enrich the contents, but you can also improve them in their style, in the vocabulary, in the connectedness, and as we are talking about, achieving the directness, whether it is being received by the reader the way you wanted to, or the way you thought to convey your ideas. One point that I just now mentioned, which I wanted to add to this discussion, was the language. You see, language is very important, and many a times we recognize the authors by the flair, by their language, by their style of writing, by their diction. So it is very important, and it's an established fact that all the acclaimed writers have their distinguished style of writing. There is a saying that man style is man. So what is style is man? It is a quote from the stylistics. It says whatever you write presents your persona, your personality. Your writings represent or the writings of a particular author represents the author in the fora. It sort of builds the image. We just, even if we read something, if some author is our favorite author, we love some writer, we are, we have read a lot of works of a particular author or writer, and if we appreciate it, we like it, then when you read some next work, some next coming story, or something else written by that particular author, we immediately recognize. So that means the image which we have built in our minds, in our consciousness about a particular writing, then that writing is actually identified by the style. And whenever that style is found, that style comes to our notice in any writing, we immediately say, no, this must have been written by so and so. So there is an individualized language, what I am trying to say. Actually, all the good authors have their individualized, language. So language means doesn't that he or she brings something from another world. If one is writing in English, obviously one has to choose the vocabulary of English. But then there are a lot of options, lot of shades, lot of words which seemingly or on directness they convey something, but when you go slightly deeper into it, then they convey different meaning. We will come to that when we talk about the Avidha Lakshana and Vyanjana. So, three Shabda Shaktis, because all those are very important, how the words convey their meaning. So, those are primarily like referential meaning, emotive meaning, uh, etc. So we will talk about the connotative and denotative meanings also, or emotive meanings, or the referential meaning. So the Sanskrit poetics talks about four Shabda Shaktis. There are four forces behind the word which conveys different meanings in different connotations. If there is a denotative, so that means it's a direct meaning, referential meaning. If we derive out different meaning, then it is a connotative meaning. If it is something else, then there can be an emotive meaning to a word. So this individualized language is always an asset of author, and we all know the good authors have their own language. That means they have their own diction, their own style, their own usage of words, selection of words, and so forth. Why is it? Because language is part of the human behavior. As the human as a human changes, obviously the language also changes, because it is a it's a part of the human behavior which keeps on changing. Therefore, it is earnestly desired that an aspiring author, an aspiring writer, uh, is better if he or she tries to develop his or her own language, means style, diction, uh, and selection of words. So, because it can otherwise be checked very easily, because we are already attuned to a particular style in writing. So, if that style comes, we obviously ascribe that writing to a particular author with whom we are quite acquainted with. But if a new author is coming, then we realize no, this it seems to me a new writing. So, how do we say or understand that this is new writing? Obviously, because it is right. It is the writings are basically identified by the individualized language. How an individual use the language. So, because individualization factor comes into it, because language is part of the human behavior. Every human being thinks differently. I would just like to add a small quote which is there um, by the Edward Sapir. He has said, language is guide to social reality. First, he talks about the language is guide to social reality. So, what is social reality? That is the that explains, that is the explanation of a group or a society. So, similarly, human beings, if they belong to a particular society, they have particular style of usage of language. At the same time, we also know that language is primarily psychological eruption. How one thinks in, how does one interwove the ideas, how does one uh, goes into the chain of thoughts and adopts a particular style of expression. So that expression is the style of writing. So we have to very deeply think over it, that whenever an aspiring author comes to our knowledge, then we immediately recognize, no, no, this is right. This writing I have not come across before. How do we say that? Because we are accustomed with the style of writing. Because it is a style is basically an outcome of an individual, his or her behavioral aspect. How does one behave? Behavioral doesn't mean how does one behave in social matter, but how does one behave in expressing his or her ideas, the style of or the selection of words, diction, tone, etc. All these comes into it. We'll move to block 3, which is authenticity versus credibility. This is very important because we are talking about uh, the general principles of writing, and within this particular we are discussing the block 1, which is the fundamental norms of writing. I would like to say that one of the key factors of any good writing is the authenticity. Authenticity. And we all know if we consider something authentic or original, then we say no, it is credible. So this is very important. We might be quite clear in our ideas. We might have achieved an individualized language status, but if we are not authentic in our uh, content, in our idea, in our thought, it is very difficult that the work will, be acclaimed or it will earn respect. Therefore, it is very, very important that okay, no issue. Please join us. No issue. Uh, sometimes there might be very good work, but when we go through it, when we go through a particular poem, which might seemingly be very interesting, very good to read, suddenly we say, no, I have read the same thing somewhere else. So what is this? I have read the same thing somewhere else. Or sometimes we even come to a small, maybe not necessarily right, maybe partially right conclusion that it seems that this has been copied from that particular uh, composition. How do we say that? Because to us it doesn't seem authentic. So it is very important that the aspiring or the budding writers should focus on authenticity, should develop their own style of language, their own chain of thoughts. Then they can think over it, and as I mentioned, they can make it clear. So it is very interesting to be clear about what you want to make clear. So this is quite a good statement, and this will travel across with us during our discussion. Very interesting example is given. Who is the best judge of authenticity? Who is the best judge of authenticity? So there's a small quote which is quite interesting. The child accepts the incredible quite easily. If the child accepts the incredible, that would yes, please. Can you put your query again? Uh, Somebody said readers, right? I agree. The readers will also find it whether the work is authentic or not. But who is the best judge? So there's a small illustration. So it says the child accepts the incredible quite easily. So what happens? The the children are a great fan of stories, fairy stories, folk songs, folk tales, and anything that is presented before them in an interesting manner. But sometimes, the children, they do not show much or uh, sustained interest in certain stories. So then why is it so that they are not interested? When sometimes they are too interested in some tales, some stories, or something else like folk tales, etc. Sometimes they do not, and they would say, "No, I do not like it." Then what is the reason? The reason is that the child's thought process is very clear. The children love to listen or read only what appeals to them. So this appeal factor is very important. So if it is there, if it takes them into another world, if they are able to travel with the story and enters into a new world, so they have a different experience. So that means if a different experience is there, it can be claimed as incredible. Means what is incredible? Incredible in the sense that it is uh, beyond explanation. It is a pure joy. So if a child receives or draws a real pleasure, real joy, real satisfaction, that would definitely be termed as incredible. We also state certain things. The mature people also, the readers will also say something if they come across very good piece of writing. Then they will say, "Oh yeah, it is an incredible mm, composition." But what happens that mature opinions are always uh, full of in a way they are achieved incredibility or incredible feelings will be achieved only after certain analysis, certain analytical process of say, we will say no, it's an incredible idea. Somebody say it is an incredible composition. Somebody say, oh, the language used is incredible. Somebody say, oh, the treatment is incredible. So I'm talking about from my own experience, and maybe certain people will agree with that. But not that everybody should agree, because we're talking about creative writing, and creative writing is one such area about which every person feels differently, because language, as I mentioned, it is an outcome of the human behavior, and as a person changes, the style, the usage of language also changes. Two people cannot express the same thing in same words, in same style. They will explain perfectly the idea, but with a different composition, with a different style. So that is one. It is just in literary circle it is said that the child accepts the incredible, because mature opinion will always be there after small critical appraisal of the composition. Something the the children do not worry about. This is very important. How do they achieve the incredibility, or how do we describe incredibility? We come to the authenticity, because incredible or incredibility will contribute to authenticity. Sometimes what we do, we read fairy tales. A mature person reads some folk tale, some will read some poetry, will read some story. And if the story is too fancy, too imaginative, too innovative, then the person will say, no, 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 it's not possible. It cannot happen like this. Even though one knows that he or she is reading a story. But when one say, no, it really doesn't happen. So that really does not happen is not the case with the children. Children will accept. Children will accept improbability. This is quite interesting. In fact, when we will come to the children writing, we will discuss it a little more deeply. But I thought I should mention it. The child is or the children are not worried about improbability. The adults are worried. They are thinking. They will say, no, this is not possible. There is no probability of happening this particular thing. So the child might ask somebody to, they will say, no, why this big elephant cannot enter this small gate. So he will say, no, it is not possible. The gate is very narrow. So the child will say, no, but I want to do it. So what is the solution? Then the child, what he will do? The child will bring a small toy, small elephant, which is basically a toy, and then he will push that through that particular gate. So these are the improbabilities, but they happens with the children. So children are not normally worried about the improbability when some folk tales are given to them to read, or some fairy tales are composed. They can just, they can just enjoy the credibility, the the real pleasure that is coming out of it. They do not worry much about its structure, much about its probability. So sometimes some people have said that incredibility, while it is one parameters for the good poetry, a good folk tale or story, what goes into making that perfect story or perfect folk tale is that it should have an element of improbability, which is appreciated by the children. Great. Now, a small clarity. This is very important. I thought this is very interestingly put here in our study material. Sense of reality, but not in the beginning, later. When the child grows, or as the child grows, he or she starts to realize eventually, at the spur of the moment while one is reading, no issue of improbability, or no issue of probability. Improbability will do as long as it gives pleasure, it gives joy to read. But the child, sometimes his or her experiences, which are stored in the children's mind, when they become little mature or they grow, they continue to analyze those gathered experiences. Then they realize, so the reality or the probability, which at one particular point of time they didn't bother much about, later on they will also bother about the reality. So there is a saying, sense of reality, not in the beginning. However, it definitely comes later. So it definitely comes later means the child will definitely at certain point of time think about the probability which at the time of reading a particular composition the child didn't bother. So if we are talking about the authenticity and credibility, another part is so somebody has described this that say for example there are two parts of a story, and when both part merges a story is built. So it begins with absurdity, and it ends with uh, uh, delightfulness. So what happens? Some author will or some story will begin. Once in a deep forest, there were a lot of animals. Suddenly, a small cat entered into the forest. Then a dog came. Then number of other wild animals came. Like this, the beginning might not be very interesting, but as the tale or the narration or the story moves ahead, it continues to develop. Many other factors which are very interesting to the child, they become part of the story, part of the tale, and eventually they end in a tone that is very very delightful to the child. So because then there might be peacock, and there might be certain other birds, then their sounds will appeal to the reader. then their actions will also give a lot of joy to the child. So initially there was nothing. There's a simple description of a forest, which might not be very interesting to the children. But as the story begins, and then as it continues to grow, moves ahead, a lot of other factors are added. So there is a saying that yes, there are two parts of composition for the children: absurd beginning and delightful ending. So if all of us have read the children's stories. They begin with something which might, which is seemingly not very interesting, but then as it develops, it brings into characters, many characters which are quite funny, and that fun continues to be built, and eventually there are a lot of innovations, lot of imaginations are added to it, and all those takes the child into a delightful world, and then it ends with a happy note. So it is very important, as I mentioned to you, that you cannot distort the facts. You have to be honest, because uh, if it is not, the facts are not honestly stated at some or the other point of time, the reader will judge that yes, one, these are copied, these are somebody else's ideas, or the treatment is all maybe may not be individualized, or the style of language may not be individualized. So focus is on individualized style, individualized thinking process, individualized treatment of the contents. So all these brings into a lot of authenticity, a lot of credibility. So if the work or the composition is credible, obviously it is going to be authentic. So we all know what happens in the uh, literary world. A lot of issues are there. One such issue is very well there in, which is part of higher education, or overall in the writing literary world, that is plagiarism. So plagiarism can be of many kind, not just straight quotations, but may sometimes it is also in style, it's also in language, in diction, and so forth. So this is another good example is that the children, how do children love? The children wants to play with the characters, with the animals, with the and other children, other characters which are there in the tale or in the story. So they will actually love to become one with the character. So self experience with the children. So children want to experience that whole happening. So there must be such, the writing should be such that children can become part of that imaginary world, that innovation, that fairy world. So the writer has to take, or make the children experience what is happening in the contents or in the theme. Now, what is it? Authenticity of facts. Another explanation to this: crossing the barriers. What is crossing the barriers? That means every explanation has a certain limit to which it might seem an original. But when the not only the facts are as it is repeated, but the treatment is same, the language is same, the diction is similar, So there comes you are crossing the borders. I think this all jargon is used by all of us when we come to a specific point where we feel that no, this is mine, this is yours, this is not yours, this is somebody else's. If then somebody wants to transgress that, exceeds that, we very categorically say no, this is the border, or do not cross the border. So same thing happens in the compositions also, the writings also. So if one does cross the barriers, the composition or the work will lose authenticity. What to talk about the credibility. So we have seen why do we love to read Mulk Raj Anand or Raja Rao or a lot of other R.K. Narayanan. Why do we enjoy Malgudi days? Why do we love the Raja Rao's stories, which are Puritanic stories, yet they are very good readership. So we know that they have not crossed the barrier. That means they are authentic descriptions of a particular theme. They are having an individualized treatment. The diction is unique, belonging to one particular author, and so forth. So sometimes what goes wrong, if you talk about the authenticity, obviously the sincerity aspect should be there. We all know what is to be sincere. Sincere, one has to be honest from the heart. But sometimes what happens, emotive, because the creative writing is uh, basically the writings that comes out of feelings, emotions, ideas, and so forth. If you talk about the creative writing per se, not the of course there are writings which are also creative, but those are in the category of non-creative or non-fictional or uh, journal writings. Those are functional writings, rather we may say. We write for media, we write for business, we write for any number of other professions or areas of work. Those are also creative. Though definitely the ideas go into it, they travels, and then only comes the writing. But then how do we distinguish between the real creative, means the creative writing and non-creative writing is that where ideas, feelings, and emotions are dominatingly there, or the outcome is purely on the basis of these three, four factors. It is creative writing. What happens when one, as I just now mentioned, that crossing the barriers, this has to be kept in mind. This not crossing the barriers has also to be kept in mind, even when you are in deep emotions within our inner thinking process or in our heart also. We have to be very much aware as to when we express our real feelings. Are we crossing? Are we copying somebody? Are we crossing the barrier? So that means even in the writing, the authenticity of emotions is measured by the authenticity of expression. Authenticity of emotion is measured by the authenticity of expression. This is very interesting statement. The authenticity of expression. If there is authenticity in expressions, obviously it can very well can be imagined that these are the independent ideas, independent thinkings, independent emotions. So if your expression is already an imitation of somebody else, definitely it will be treated as not authentic, not genuine composition. How do we do that? The very first judge the very first person who can testify that my expression is authentic and it is 100% my emotive or the emotional, built on my emotions, my feelings. A person himself or herself is the best judge. How do we how do we look at our own authentic or our own expressions? That can very well determine. I can also admit that it is very difficult to really admit this fact, but within the core of our hearts, we know that no, my expression is not authentic. I am trying to follow somebody. No, it is not bad to follow somebody, but not to copy somebody. Follow means you take lead or cue from someone and then try to adjust yourself into it and then develop your own style, your own diction, your own language. Ideas can be same, no doubt. Ideas, emotions are there with each and every human being, or rather, I should be using the word with each and every creative person. Every person is creative. I'm not saying that any person, anybody who is a human being is not creative, is creative in certain other ways. When we talk about the literariness, about the creativity in literature, then we say that every person thinks, every person has emotion. But the issue that I have just now mentioned is that if there is an authenticity of expression, obviously, if it appeals to the person himself or herself, if the writer in becoming thinks that oh no, it is my own style, definitely it is her or his own emotions, then there's no harm in accepting that. But maybe one has to be very honest, true, and sincere to one's own self. That is what I mean. If one is satisfied within oneself that no, my style is, my diction is, my language is, my treatment is my own, and it is authentic. The way I expressed is my own style. That would be a uh, great acceptance, great feeling, provided one is really honest to her, his or her own self. This is very important. So that is how we say authenticity of emotions is measured by the authenticity of expression. This is good. Then there's a small issue. I said that if I feel satisfied with my writing, fine, no issue. But I should feel that others should also feel satisfied. So what I can do to check myself? I will have to think from different directions, different angles. I have to 100 times think that, well, what I gather out of this particular composition, or what I like the most about this composition, or whether why I like the style, why I like the treatment, can the others also feel like this? So if you have a feeling that yes, others will also feel like this, then there is a self satisfaction, self pleasure. But if you feel no, I have certain doubts, but let me put it across. Let me not be too much worried about it. So that is self denial. So what I'm trying to say is that there shouldn't be self denial. That means the writer, what the writer feels authentic for himself or herself, he or she must be assured that this will also be considered or will also be received in the same manner as I receive it, or what I gather out of it, the others will also gather the same feeling, pleasure, emotion, information, or whatever it is out of this composition. That is fine. Otherwise, it is a self denial. So, there shouldn't be any element of self denial in one's own, in one's composition, because if that sense of guilt, sense of self denial is there, then definitely it is not going to be authentic. What to talk about the credibility. So, uh, authenticity, there are certain facts about it. You see, I just now discussed with you, everyone thinks, everyone experiences. Every human being is unique and distinct. So, obviously, every human being will have different experiences. But human being or human is a social animal because we live in a society. Sometimes our experiences are similar. We live in a particular family, we live in a particular society, our society behaves in a particular manner, and so forth. Our society thinks in a particular way. Our society has a particular tradition. The culture is very, very specific to society. But at the same time, uh, the author who is talking about a particular society, particular group of people, particular folk, you know, then he or she must be very clear about that group experience of a particular society and shouldn't try uh, to crossroad it with the experience of another society, because what will happen, that is a dangerous crossing. That means it's a challenging, not only challenging, it can be very, very difficult, means it can bring a lot of other issues into it. So, the experience barrier. What is the experience barrier? The identity that we attach to a particular society, how this particular society thinks, that is distinct to a particular society, as it is distinct to human beings, but because every human thinks, so a group of human beings forms a society or a group. So if we talk about a group, we must be very clear about the experience, about the culture of a group, and that we cannot afford to cross. I just now used the word culture because we were talking about the experience of the society. So every society, is identified by its ethos, by its norms, by its behavior, by its thinking process, by its customs and tradition. Lot of things go into making a society. Why do we call it as an Indian society? It is a Victorian society. It is something else society. It is a vintage of a Victorian society or Victorian English. How do we attach a status to a language? Sometimes we say it is peasants' language. Sometimes we say it is Victorian language. Sometimes we say it is business community's language. Sometimes we say it is Puritanic language. Why do we attach all these things to, you see, because we uh, we think a society we, we imagine a society through its culture. So culture and society, both goes together. A society is given an identity by its culture. It is known by its culture. So we have to understand in certain societies, certain cultures, there are certain norms. Perhaps you will agree that when we write about certain societies, we do not describe all the inner norms of that particular society. Why don't we do it? Because those are very, very personal to that particular society. We talk about a person, an individual we can speak about, but when we talk about society, we have to be very, very careful. So there is an experience barrier between the two societies. That means cultures. All of us know that the family structure in every society is not uh, similar. There are different traditions of marriage. There are different traditions of relationships. There are different traditions of relations between husband and wife and children. Husband and wife, fine, it is true. They are husband and wife, man and woman. But you see, how do they behave? How do they behave in their inner circle? Within the family norms, how do they behave? How do they react to each other? So forth. I mean, any number of different experiences can be there. A budding author, because mature authors are very sensible and they are very much conscious about this, that they shouldn't cross the threshold of the cultural barrier. But a beginner author can sometimes unconsciously cross this particular barrier. So that can be very dangerous. That can bring a lot of problems to a budding author or can give rise to many other issues. So, a writer in becoming, an author in becoming, has to be very, very careful about the experience barriers, about the experience barriers about the or between the cultures, different cultures. You cannot measure each culture with the same yardstick. You have to have a different understanding. So, this different understanding, while it is an asset of a writer, it is very, very cautiously to be followed by the beginners. So, the culture is very important, you see. Uh, Now, this is very interesting. Cross cultural rates can violate norms of decency. This is very well put. Cross cultural rates can violate the norms of decency. Do you like this statement? Cross cultural rates can violate the norms of decency. The word the usage of words is quite interesting, and I think it really befits, especially if you look at the Indian stories. The We read the account of different communities. So if you try to sort of mix up, if we try to suddenly burst into the inner structure, inner setup of a society, which has a very distinct culture, and then try to pick certain things from that and put it in our composition, well, it can be very challenging. It can end in a big trouble. So the cross cultural rates, uh, and it is very serious thing to attempt, because it can violate the norms of decency. What is decency? The What is the biggest trait of a good author or good writer is the decency. The good author will never, uh, the word used here is a raid, or I would say, make inroads suddenly into the inner behavior of or inner experience of a cultural group or a society. He or she will never venture into unannounced. I would take small example like these days we are reading and watching a lot about the inner experience. Experience here I mean to say the way of life of many tribes, of many ethnic groups. But that is not without one representative of that particular group with the author. Author can be of different types. The producer is also an author, broadcaster is also an author, a writer is also an author. So, author I'm using here quite broadly, but that is not without announcement. What do I mean by announcement? Means taking into confidence a particular group of people and then convincing them, well, I am going to talk, I wish to talk about this particular subject. Would you allow me? One. Another stage, which is very, very important, there are layers and layers of experiences of the society. 100,000 layers. We all know all these things have never been revealed. They are very, very personal and specific to the culture or to the society to which the culture of the society to which they belong. So one has to obtain permission. Fine, I can have an understanding and a description of the topmost layer, then the next bottom layer, then the next bottom layer. So you might be allowed to go into 4, 5, 10, 20 layers. But there is possibility that the society will not allow you to go or go beyond that. But if one does that, that is a huge crime, that is a cross-cultural raid, and this can end in a big trouble. I would like to, as I just now mentioned, a lot of ethnic groups are being studied. People are making films. The authors are writing about them, and also they are entering into their domains, their households, their rituals. But then they should restrict themselves. They should have a proper permission. One interesting thing that comes out of it is how do we describe the society? This is very interesting, and this is very important for the budding authors to learn. How do we describe a society? There is a tool that is kinship terms. Kinship terms. I'm sure you know that. In Hindi, we call them नाते रिश्ते की शब्दावली. So, if we can properly understand what is the kinship structure, definitely we can better understand the structure of the society, how the how the different people of a particular society are interwoven, are interrelated, and so forth. So I am adding an element just from my side that there is a role for the kinship terms. So we cannot ignore the kinship structure, which is described by kinship terms, and the budding in author has to have this understanding very, very clearly. This is very important. Uh, there is a situation, authenticity makes all the difference between great comedy and situational comedy. This is very big issue. We are all aware of the comedy. How do we describe great comedy and situational comedy? Situational comedy is just to discuss a particular kind of situation, but that doesn't overall represent a particular. It, 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 it it doesn't rather represent the whole idea. There is a small or fraction of idea which is developed for the situational comedy, but the entire process will ultimately end in great comedy. But important point is, what is comedy? How do we? The most difficult, the most challenging art of writing is to write comedy. Whether simply making fun of a group of people or of a society is comedy. If that is so, it is deeply deplorable. Comedy has to have a very powerful message, a very powerful representation of the content. Content, I mean, I'm taking at a subject of, or rather the my subject, my content. So it has to be very carefully, very cautiously to be represented and represented quite positively. So great comedies are not built on the negativity, are not built. There is a space for pun. There is a space for in certain situations, if you want to describe a negative character, mockery. All these comes into it, but with the right treatment. So this treatment is very important, which has to be understood by the budding authors. So if you look at the very important work of the Mulk Anand, The Lost Child, I think this is quite interesting reading. It really reads very well, and it deals with the uh, character in such a manner that at no point of time we feel that this is not real. He talks about the river, he talks about the locales, he talks about the people, and he uses the terms which are very very innate. Like the child says, "No, I don't want anything. I want my mother. I just want my father. I don't want all these toys, all these sweets, all these pleasurable things, and so forth." So this is very important. How does it come into writing? So I think I would say that if we aspire to be writer authors, we have to take cue from these established writers. So this was just one example, which is they are dealt in great length. So we can see the dialogues, the narrations, and then we can find out that definitely all this is quite natural, and what is natural is authentic, and what is authentic definitely it is pleasing, it is incredible. So that was uh, that was about the credibility, that was about the authenticity. So we all know if we are sincere in our hearts, definitely we are authentic, and if we feel that what we feel from this particular narration, from this particular composition, if others will also feel the same way, definitely we will find that our composition is not only authentic but it is also incredible. But at the same time, as I mentioned, incredibility has also been measured by the child's experience. How does a child react to a composition, to a fairy tale, to a story, or to any other composition which is there to for the children's reading? How do they react? How do they? So they don't bother about certain things in the beginning, but definitely at the end, at a later stage, they will surely care for it. So we have to think of that, but at the same time, What I'm trying to put across time and again is that there shouldn't be an element of self-denial. If I don't like something to be described about my family, I will never expect that this is written about somebody else's family. If I don't want certain layers of my society to be eroded, to be raided upon, then I shouldn't and I will not appreciate the same thing about other societies. So if the self and other balance is there, what sounds pleasing to me should also be sounding pleasing to others. If these feelings are there, definitely the writing will be authentic and at the same time credible as well. We'll take a small discussion on the uh, authorial voice. What is authorial voice? Who is an author? What is his voice? This is a small cliche. How do we explain authorial voice? Basically, it is the word is used is the musicalize it. How does the reader musicalize it? How does the reader see sees the author into his or her composition? So when someone reads an article or a story or a play, then along with the uh, reader's feelings, there is another character which is portrayed through the reading. That is the author. If author is able to talk, if author is able to make the reader hear his or her voice, that is authorial voice. That means simple as that, as we discussed just now. We should be clear what we want to make clear. That means if the reader is able to hear the words of the author through the writings, so that means to hear means the readings must be so uh, sincere, so honest that he or she, that is reader, is able to not only imagine the portrayal of the contents but also able to hear the author, what author wants to state or say or express. So the reader should not, juggle with the contents, with the expression, with the narration, with the dialogues, or with the style, with the diction, but simply read and then there in the deep in the consciousness, the author simply would sound, yes, this is my message. So that is it, the author voice. So what happens when we read something? We do not, we not only imagine the author or the portrayal that is there within the contents, but we also imagine and also listen to the author. So this is authorial voice. This is very important, particularly for the poetry. Yes, it is equally important. What is authorial voice? How does one listen the author's voice or musicalize it? The word is musicalize it. It is not visualize. Visualize is means when you try to do it. But musicalize is, yes, one is in a state of visualization. Means the composition is so engrossing that the reader is already taken into a stage where he or she is already able to visualize it, so musicalize it. So it is state of enjoying the composition, state of taking pleasure out of the composition, at the same time getting the true message, getting the real message that is encoded in the composition by the author. So there is a question: how to do it? How does it happen? There are two ways. One mode is the direct method, another one is the autobiographical mode. What is the direct method? Some authors speak some authors speak directly to the reader, just as they are simply sitting in a drawing room, they are talking to each other. Well, Mr. X is with me, we are having tea. Later on, we will go and do some marketing. Well, X, Mr., how do we do it? All this is happening directly, all this is a conversation between the author and the reader. What is being said is directly targeted to the reader, and the reader is getting the message very clearly from the author itself. But in certain situations, so this is a direct method of narration or treatment of the content. There's another method which is autobiographical mode. What all of us know are aware what is autobiographical mode. Autobiographical. Biographical is to talk about someone's life. Autobiographical when this talk takes place by the author or by the one who is talking himself. So when the author talks about his or her own life, himself or herself, it is autobiography. So there is a mode which is autobiographical mode. So what happens in the autobiographical mode? The author starts to, I was in a deep slumber. Suddenly the door was pushed and there appeared four masked people. One of them took me hostage and the another one pushed me behind the lead person, so forth, so forth. You go on adding details and details and details. There is no end to it. Ultimately, it becomes an autobiographical mode of narrations. Gandhiji has used this technique. Many people have used this technique when they talk about themselves, their life, their experiences, their viewpoints, their own assessment, and so forth. So uh, this becomes a particular style. This is one particular mode of. So one is direct mode, another one is the autobiographical mode. What I'm trying to say is that how does author reach the reader? Either by direct mode, where the author talks to the reader, that means through the various characters, various contributors to that particular composition. But then those they are talking to one another, or maybe to a group also. But in many compositions, we do not find this. We find that one person is talking about one's own life, one's own experiences, and so forth. So, what we were talking about the authorial voice. So, these are two modes. So some people find that for certain sections of reading, the autobiographical mode is more suitable, more approachable. Some people do not like a person to talk about himself or herself, about his or her own achievements and other things. So both ways it is there. So it is depending upon the reader or upon the readers. How do they react? Because sometimes the author is also sounding, in some sections, a very, very intimate and private. We know that there are certain autobiographies where autobiographical descriptions where it is very, very difficult for the readers to read them because there are two intimate details which are very specific. At times might be there a small section which like to read such details, but a larger body of readers will not appreciate, will not like to read those details. So there are pros and cons. There are readers who like the one note better than the other. So some people like to be involved. So then there has to be a dialogic mode where the author is talking to the person and sending his or her message across. Say, for example, one say, "Oh well, I am in deep sleep. Mr. X, are you listening to me? What I am thinking? Are you able to gather what I feel?" So this way, oh, somebody will say, "No, no, not really." Then the first person will say, "Well, I was thinking about this." So here the author is talking to the second person, even describing his or her own personal emotions, feelings, and details. So this way, sometimes the reader finds this more engrossing, where the reader or the readers also join the plot. So it is depending upon the readers how do they react. Uh, you see, the authorial voice is very, very clearly heard in the diary writing. Diary writing is purely an authorial voice because it is author's own description. So sometimes in diary writing, the author also devises certain imaginary character that is just sometimes overtly, sometimes covertly. Sometimes the author do not want to get himself or herself in a way fully known to the readers, if that publishes at all. So he brings in another character. Then that character represents the author through a pseudo identity, pseudo name, and then talks about all that is there in the author's heart or in author's mind. And this is very interesting. Author's voice with the partial omniscience. You see, partial omniscience, what is it? We all know omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. These are three metaphors. So, author's voice with partial omniscience. Author is always craving that his or her voice must be heard with every detail, but not fully, because if it is all the time talking, the author is talking about the personal experiences, then the monotony is also one element that can be coming into the composition. But in order not to do that, and at the same time to maintain the true identity, rather the do not want to reveal the complete personality, complete identity, the author, though have an element of the partial omniscience, that means the author wants that every reader should know the author. How does that happen? Whether that should happen explicitly or implicitly or overtly or covertly, that has to be devised by the author. So, in many stories, we hear dialogues, no, no, I don't know anything. Oh, sure. The other character says, oh, sure, but I do know something. So, this something is partial omniscience, means even though the author is not fully, I should say, unraveled or revealed, but there is some uh, revelation which is this, some partial revelation is there with the reader. So, such dialogues, such counter narratives can make the author partially omniscience. It is an innate desire with the author that the author should be known by the readers. Of course, not only the author, but then if that is the only sole idea, it becomes, in truer sense, autobiography. But an objective autobiography will have a greater element in it, that is the message. So, if we talk about the content, if we want about the clarity as to we should be clear what we want to make clear, this what WHAT should also be there in the description, not just me or I. That means not only the author, but some other that comes under the category of what. What do you want to convey? What do you want to talk about? That what should also be explained. So, with this, I will conclude our discussion for today. We will begin with the block 2 tomorrow, and if there is any query about today's discussion or any issue that you would like to talk about, we are here. So, anything that you would like to discuss?
Doctor, sir, thank you.
So we will go to block 2. Okay. So block 2 with certain other issues which are there with regard to the structure of material. So structure of material will deal with the themes. How do we decide themes, and how do we prepare for writing, and along with it we will also be talking about the opening of a composition and ending a composition, and if time permits we will talk about the, the climax, that is the integral part of any composition. How do the authors bring climax to their composition? And very importantly, very important aspect of a composition, good composition, is its end. So there are certain techniques which are applied. There are certain devices which are used by the authors to begin their compositions. So tomorrow, the block being entitled "Structure of the Material" means how do we present our material? How do we present our structure? So we will talk about the theme, We'll talk about the opening, we'll talk about the climax, and then we'll talk about the conclusion or the ending of composition. So, well, I say good day to all of you. Thank you very much for being patient with me in this particular session. So, meet you tomorrow. Have a good day. Thank you.
Sir, can I ask a question?
हाँ जी. Yeah.
Okay. This is regarding the authenticity and credibility and also the
Yeah.
authorial voice. Um, Young writers, I mean, like new writers,
Okay.
aspiring writers, are encouraged to read a lot of, other works of the masters and classics and all that. Other works which have gone before them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're asked to emulate those their favorite writers. But at the same time, they should not be called copycats. How is that possible?
They should be. They are asked to emulate.
Yeah, imitate the um,
No,
uh,
better word is emulate.
imitate.
Okay. And then
They imitate the authors that have gone before them, but at the same time, they need to have their own identity, like their own style. You follow somebody and then you need to have your own style. Isn't that a bit contradiction?
it is. But this is the crux of the writing. And if you can really visualize, because you are saying they are to imitate, rather, right?
Pardon me, I didn't get it. I didn't get it quite get it.
No, young aspiring
Yes, correct,
writers are
correct,
asked or advised to imitate, right?
correct, correct.
But at the same time, the emphasis is on developing their own style, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Becoming individual authors. I'm
correct.
using the individual specifically.
Yes,
So, what is this individuality? This individuality is in selection of contents, process of thoughts, treatment of contents, style, language, diction, uses of metaphor and everything, right? So it is a
okay,
huge conflict. I do agree.
yeah,
But if one understands that imitation doesn't mean imitation is not that you you imitate, you do not become copy or you do not adopt somebody. uh, Imitation is only as far as understanding the methodology or the strategy of that celebrity author or that acclaimed author or the masters, you see. But then
okay,
when we call the individualized or achieving an individuality in writing, that has to be of the author in making distinct. So there is a while there is a contradiction. The answer is also in very much lying in there, because you imitate, you understand, you analyze yourself. Then what I said, that if when you imitate somebody and then express yourself and then assess yourself inside within your own self, and if you find whether do I sound authentic, so if your consciousness says yes you sound authentic, well and good, but there must not be an element or iota of sense of self denial, because if you feel, others will also receive you in the same manner as you yourself receiving your own composition. So with the passage, with the journey, with the pursuit, all these things are achieved. Imitation is just to get idea as to how somebody writes. Imitation doesn't mean that you copy somebody in toto.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Welcome and thank you very much. Good day. See you tomorrow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, RC. Thanks a lot. We'll meet tomorrow. Okay.